All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining and for bearing with us as we get up and running with the um, technological matters. It's a great pleasure to welcome my neighbor and colleague, Dr. Angelina Chin, who is joining us from over in Pomona College. Dr. Chin's teaching and research interests revolve around the themes of colonialism, political movements, diaspora, feminism, sexuality, and disability in modern East Asia. Her research focuses on the social histories of marginal people, identities, and citizenship, as well as trans-regional networks in Hong Kong, Taiwan, China, and Japan. In her first book, Bound to Emancipate, Working Women and Urban Citizenship in Early 20th Century China and Hong Kong, Chin explores the concept of women's emancipation in early 20th century South China and how lower-class women were both liberated and constrained by the social and political discourses on what women should become. In her second monograph, 2023, Unsettling Exiles, Chinese Migrants in Hong Kong and the Southern Periphery During the Cold War, which some of our students will be lucky to get. She argues that Hong Kong identity emerged from the collective trauma of exile and dislocation, as well as a sense of being on the margins of both the communist and nationalist Chinese regimes during the Cold War. She's currently working on a project I think one of which we're going to learn about today, about the blind workers' labor movement in Hong Kong since the late 1960s. And the other is a multimedia project on assistive technologies and devices for people with disabilities. She's collaborated with social scientists and engineers in Japan, including the Institute of Arts Vivendi at Ritsumeikan University, the Advanced Telecommunication Research Institute International, ATR, and the Department of Robotics at the Osaka Institute of Technology. I will share her faculty profile again in the chat. Folks can there will be some time for questions and discussion at the end. I also want to thank my colleague, Dr. Jess Nairn, who is helping with the slides right now. And note also that this is an event that is cross-listed with the Modern China lecture series and also the Disability Studies lecture series. It's a great pleasure to welcome Dr. Angelina Chin. Please join me in welcoming.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Jerry Murray, for inviting me to this talk. And thank you, Professor Jess Nairn, for helping with the slides. And I apologize for, maybe not updating my Zoom. And that's why I cannot upload the slide for some reason. This never happened to me before. So please bear with me. Today, study of the blind factory in Hong Kong. It's officially called the Hong Kong Factory for the Blind. And the title of my talk is Labor, Colonial Welfare, and Disability, Blind Factory Workers in Hong Kong. This is an ongoing project, and I want to tell you about kind of the overall framework of my project. So here is the outline of this presentation. I will discuss employment and disability. Then I will turn to the case of the Hong Kong Blind Factory. And after that, we will examine 4 periods of change within the factory that have shaped the status of the blind workers. And lastly, we will discuss the future of diversity and inclusivity based on this case. So first of all, we will talk about employment and disability. And so first of all, what does work mean to us? It's common for people, especially academics, who don't make a lot of money, to say that work is not just about money, but about other aspects of life. For example, disability rights advocate and scholar Liz Sayes said that work is linked to well-being, skill development, self-esteem, confidence, and better health outcome for all citizens. In other words, it gives us a sense of identity. Sayes also believes that we can find friendship in our work, and this would reduce our sense of loneliness and social isolation. Employment is often used as a key signifier within contemporary society for social inclusion. It gives us a sense of belonging and community. In a larger societal framework, work may help us believe that we are making a contribution to society, that we are a worthy member of that nation or an imagined community. But the monetary value of work is still very important, especially for people who are impoverished. Australian disability scholar Jennifer Mays has argued that, quote, not attaching monetary value to work would relegate people with disabilities to the margins because it reinforces the idea that people with disabilities can only participate with people in spaces of charity. And to be realistic, for most of us, we work because we need a means of living. And not having a living wage means that people cannot have economic independence. In this talk, I am situating my case study of the Hong Kong Blind Factory in the larger framework of work and employment for disabled people. Here, I want to focus on two common models of employment for disabled people around the world in the past 100 years. The first model is a disability particular employment model. Historically, the main means of employment for people with disability through a segregated model of work known as sheltered workshops. Take Goodwill, for example. It was founded in 1902. The organization built its model around taking used goods, repairing them, and reselling them. The workers performing these repairs were often disabled, described on Goodwill's own website as being of little employability. In the US, some Goodwill employees in the workshops earned as little as $1 an hour. This practice has been legally protected for decades. In the US, in 1938, when the federal government established the minimum wage, lawmakers excluded certain groups of workers, including those with disabilities. Under Section 14C of the Fair Labor Standards Act, employers can obtain a special wage certificate, allowing them to pay disabled workers far below minimum wage. So, what was the justifications for that? The Department of Labor spokesperson said it provides workers with disabilities the opportunity to be given meaningful work. The CEO of Goodwill in 2017, Jim Gibbons, said, quote, it's typically not about their livelihood. It's about their fulfillment. It's about being a part of something, unquote. What they're implying is that the work that their disabled employees do doesn't deserve a minimum wage. The good news is that many places are now getting rid of this clause. Some states, like California, have taken action, requiring that by January 2025, all employers must pay disabled workers minimum wage. In many developed countries and regions, it has become a trend to move away from disability particular employment options. In the US, under Title I of the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, employers are required to provide reasonable accommodations to ensure that people with disabilities have an equal opportunity to not only secure jobs, but also thrive in them, which means that the employers have to provide modifications or adjustments to a job, the work environment, or the hiring process. Supposedly, these modifications would enable an individual with a disability to have an equal opportunity, not only to get a job, but successfully perform their job tasks. However, many people with disabilities find mainstream employment hard and socially isolating, with a lack of ongoing support to maintain their employment. So, is integrated employment always a better model? So, I want all of you to keep these two models in mind as we move to my case study of the Hong Kong Blind Factory. Jess, I wonder if you could do slideshow instead because there's some like fade in that I wonder if it would help you.
Absolutely. So, what I'm going to have to do is download it and then bring it up through the download. But I can definitely do that.
But
It,
if it's too troublesome, that's okay.
oh, no, 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 nothing at all. It's almost halfway downloaded already. I just can't bring it into presentation mode. It's almost like a PDF on Dropbox.
Really? Okay. Okay,
Uh,
that's fine because yeah.
it's ready right now. I got you.
Okay, that would be great. Thanks.
Yeah, in theory. We're
Thank
going.
you.
What's happening?
Okay, so I'll keep on talking as we go on to I think we are on maybe 10 right now. Um,
And then presentation mode is here somewhere. I never use PowerPoint, so if you see presentation mode or
oh,
want to direct me to it,
it's the bottom. It's the bottom. There's a button for it. If you go to the bottom of the slide, and
got
then
it. My chat's in the
next
way.
to the one next to uh the the
This
volume. Yeah,
little
yeah,
guy here.
yeah, yeah,
Perfect.
yeah.
Okay.
I think it's the next slide right now. Yes. And then the next one.
Okay.
Thanks. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
The history of the blind factory in Hong Kong is deeply connected to the broader story of blind activism in the United Kingdom. One of the key figures in this movement was John Wilson, a blind activist who in 1950 founded the Royal Commonwealth Society for the Blind, originally known as the Royal British Empire Society for the Blind. Wilson had fought for the working rights of blind individuals in the UK in his early days, and his efforts laid the groundwork for a global network of supporters. Um, Today, that organization still exists, known as Sight Savers. Its mission has evolved to focus on preventing avoidable blindness, fighting neglected tropical diseases, and promoting equal rights and opportunities for people with disabilities. As the original name suggests, the society's reach extended across the former colonies of the British Empire. So John Wilson directly or indirectly helped the formations of member organizations overseas. In the 1950s, he helped form Society for the Blind in places like Kenya, Uganda, Ghana, Zimbabwe, and Nigeria, focusing on Africa, and then later on expanding to Asia, reaching India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and eventually Hong Kong. The Hong Kong Society for the Blind, or HKSB, was established in 1958 as a local member organization of this international network. At the time, it was the primary non-governmental organization in Hong Kong dedicated to supporting visually impaired individuals. What made Hong Kong Society for the Blind unique was its strong connection to the colonial infrastructure. In fact, its service for blind people predated most of the city's public welfare programs for people with disabilities. The society was overseen by a council composed of colonial elites, what we might call social elites today. One of its major initiatives was the establishment of the Hong Kong Factory for the Blind, modeled after the sheltered factory system in the UK. I'm going to use the syncronym of HKSB here. The factory officially opened in 1963 and was designed to provide employment opportunities for young people who were blind or partially sighted. As at its peak, the factory employed around 360 workers, with over 200 workers in the 1960s and 70s. However, the number gradually declined in the following decades. While most of the factory workers were visually impaired, the management and operational staff, such as supervisors, technical instructors, and administrators, were sighted. At its height, the factory had between 10 and 15 departments engaging in a range of manual tasks. In these photos you see on the screen, we see workers assembling earphones for Cathay Pacific on the top right photo, and people sewing on the bottom left photo, and people making brooms on the top left, and then there are some making woodwork on the bottom right. So here's a catalog of the blind factory products in 1974. They made a variety of products from tools to wooden crates to brooms and uniforms. In the very early days, they also made rattan products, buttons, and mouse traps. These products were typically sold through government contracts and to some private buyers. Besides looking at the archives, I also interviewed workers in the past few years. Here is what some of them said about their work at the factory. One guy, Sin Wing Sung, you can see him in the bottom picture on the left. He said, quote, the things that we produce may be cheap, but our jobs give us working opportunities and dignity. It's important for us not to have to get social welfare. We are workers, not welfare recipients, unquote. And then another worker, Yao Yunling, she is the middle lady in the top picture. She said, "Here's a bag that I have sold." So she gave me a bag that she sold for as a present. And then she continued, "I bet nobody would believe that it's sewn by a blind person. I can tell you I'm just as good as any sighted garment factory worker," unquote. Here, Yao is very proud of her sewing skills and believes that she should get paid just as much as other sighted garment factory workers. And then Xin Wingho, Xin Yiho, the older gentleman in the bottom photo on the right, he's the father of Xin Wingsung. He also had worked in the factory, and he had worked there since the 1960s. He said, quote, "I was it was quite a harmonious workplace back in the 1970s. We all chatted and sang together while we worked. We supported each other, but this is no longer true these days. Each person just does their own work. We cannot even talk loudly," unquote. To Xin Yiho, the father, the factory gives him a sense of community, and a lot of workers like Xin Yiho, and his son Xin Wengsung found their spouses there as well. So why did Xin Yiho feel that things have changed over the years? This has to do with four changes that happened across the next decades. I'm going to briefly discuss the four periods of change that have shaped the status of the workers. First, the first period of change were the strikes between 1968 to 1971. And then the second period of change is the modernization period. And then the third period of change is the introduction of sheltered workshop section in 1990s. And then lastly, the redevelopment project in 2018. On the left of this slide, we see a newspaper clipping about the establishment of the factory in 1963. On the right is a timeline of the four periods. As we can see, the factory has lasted for over 60 years. So there were two strikes at the Hong Kong Society for the Blind's workshop, one in 1968 and another in 1971. The 1968 strike was triggered by wage reductions due to a lack of orders. Some workers were also transferred to different departments and forced to learn new trades. They demanded a living wage and called for a fairer treatment between sighted and blind employees. Interestingly, the strike was shaped by the political climate of the time, particularly the leftist riots in Hong Kong and the Cultural Revolution in China. So at that time, there were strikes in many factories in Hong Kong, and some say that they're responding to the Cultural Revolution in China, and these strikes were largely condemned by the public because they were seen as a communist influence from mainland China. But to the workers, they see the society as a colonial oppressor. And some of their rhetoric called for unity within the working class to resist colonialism. Although the strike ultimately failed, it was a critical turning point. It marked the first moment when blind workers began to see themselves as workers. I argue that this was the beginning of a rise in workers' consciousness among them. Dissatisfied with the outcome, the workers organized a second strike in 1971. This time, the main issue was the proposed renaming of the blind factory to the so-called Training and Rehabilitation Center for the Blind. So some workers had been reclassified as temporary staff and were dismissed, further fueling discontent. In this second strike, workers demanded higher wages, insisted on keeping the name factory, and called for restructuring of the management to ensure more democracy and fairness in the workplace. This time, they received public and student support. The strike succeeded. The name was not changed, and wages were raised. More importantly, the two strikes revealed deep tensions between the society and the workers. The society maintained that the factory was primarily a training institution and a welfare institution, not a formal workplace. Based on that view, it refused to guarantee a fixed living wage. Wages were tied to available contracts, and the society argued its mission was to rehabilitate blind individuals so they could reintegrate into society. It also believed workers should rely on public assistance to supplement their income. But from the perspective of the blind workers, the Hong Kong Society for the Blind workshop was a factory, and they were real workers, not welfare recipients. As workers, they believed they were entitled to a living wage. After the minimum wage law was passed in 2010, they fought to have the factory included. Some had attempted employment outside the factory, but their training there had not adequately prepared them for jobs in the open market. Following the success of the workers' strikes, the factory shifted its focus toward becoming a more competitive and modern operation. In the years after 1971, especially between 1972 and 1975, the factory made efforts to modernize by investing in new machinery and equipment. At the same time, it began phasing out departments that specialized in traditional handmade products, such as rattenware, baskets, and mousetraps, which were no longer viable in a changing industrial landscape. However, these efforts were short-lived. Just a few years later, the factory faced another financial crisis. This wasn't just an internal issue, it reflected broader economic and industrial shifts happening across Hong Kong at the time. One major factor was the automation of light industries. As technology advanced, tasks that had once relied on manual labor were now being performed by machines. Mass production became the norm, and small-scale manual work began to lose its place in the market. Another turning point came with China's economic reforms. With access to cheaper labor and production costs across the border, many Hong Kong factories, including those in light industry, relocated to mainland China during the 1980s. As a result, many local factories shut down. At the same time, social changes were transforming the lives of younger blind individuals. Thanks to increased access to education and assistive technologies, many were no longer limited to manual factory labor. Instead, they began seeking employment in the service sectors and other areas of the growing tertiary industry. The consequences for the factory were clear. First, the workforce began to age, with fewer young people entering. Second, traditional handmade product lines were gradually phased out. Third, demand for staple products like brooms and wooden crates dropped sharply through the 1970s and 1980s. By the 1990s, most of the factory's original departments had closed down, and it was quite clear that the revenue of the factory could not rely on the sales of its product. Due to the decline in the number of workers entering the workforce, the factory added the sheltered workshop section and its trainees program in the 1990s. The trainees were registered as welfare recipients. And unlike the workers who were mostly visually impaired, a lot of the trainees were individuals with intellectual or mental disabilities. Also, unlike the workers who received normal wages, the trainees only received daily transportation stipend, which was around 38 Hong Kong dollars in 2026, and in US dollars was about 5 US dollars per day. The justification that the Society for the Blind gave for adding the trainees to the factory was that more disabled people could benefit, and they could replace the aging workers who had passed away or retired. But workers and the advocates explained that the real reason behind this was that the inclusion allowed the factory and the society to get more government subvention. This has allowed the management staff to keep their jobs. But one irony is that the workers were required to retire at the age of 55, but they could be recruited as trainees after their retirement. For example, Xin Yiho, whom we mentioned before, had become a trainee after working in the factory for 40 years. His income was reduced to 1/3 or 1/4 of what he used to make as a worker. Another problem is that the factory stopped recruiting new workers, so the workers will be all replaced by so-called service recipients or trainees in the future. As trainees, they did not have insurance and other benefits. So the fourth moment of change was the redevelopment project that they announced in 2018. In 2018, the government revealed a plan to redevelop the factory. The old factory is set to be demolished and to be rebuilt. During the 5-year reconstruction period, the society planned to move the factory to a remote location far from the city center. The workers felt that the choice of the inconvenient location was a tactic to make them quit. They were also very angry that the society did not consult with them before the decision was made. This led to another round of protests in 2019, forcing the government and the society to find a more urban location for the factory. Since 2020, the factory had been temporarily relocated to an abandoned secondary school campus after the protests, so it was a compromise by the government. But currently, only three traditional departments remained. The first one was the sewing department, and then the second was the Treasury Tech department. I will talk about Treasury Tech in a second. And then the third department was the cardboard department, so where they assemble cardboard boxes. All the other sections have died out. Many workers believe that the management of the Society for the Blind is waiting for the rest of the workers to quit or retire. And they probably will have retired or become trainees in the next 10 to 15 years. The factory will be rebuilt into a 17-story integrated rehabilitation service complex designed to support individuals with all types of disabilities. The current plan is that they will keep half a floor of the new factory to continue its operation. So the last theme of my talk is the future of diversity and inclusivity. In May 2020, in a journal called Construction, it is an online architecture journal, a student project entitled Human Machine Environment Ecology, an experimental performance factory for the blind in To Kwa Wan was featured. The model was developed by an architecture student, Celia Sin, at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. She wanted to remodel the Hong Kong Blind Factory, but she wanted the factory to become not just a multi-purpose service center, but a museum. In her model, one section of the building would be a lab that can let the general public to experience blindness. As she explains, quote, the robotic components enhance the communication and open up the blind factory by inviting the public to blind sew in the dark environment as a starting point of respecting the visually impaired, unquote. That would only be one room for factory workers to work. The rest of it would be an experimental museum for people to learn about disability. So as you can see some of these photos here, the design is very modern and it shows a futuristic building with many gadgets and technology. These are other photos of the same project. Um, but I want to remind you that this is a student a student project, and this is not how the factory will be developed, but it symbolizes what kind of vision a lot of us have for this kind of traditional factory. I am, of course, very much impressed by the modern and well-intentioned designs and think that it may raise public awareness about disability. Um, it does make me wonder who is this factory museum created for? This factory museum is not created for the blind workers, and it does not create new jobs for the workers. So at this point, I would like to go back to the value of work that I mentioned at the beginning of this talk. It seems to me that over the years, besides a basic income, the workers did develop these other meanings of work. They found a sense of identity, a community, and they also feel that they are contributing to society. Unfortunately, when they have found these meaning, the factory is disappearing. And very soon, there will be no more jobs for the workers. I would argue that a significant source of their satisfaction actually stems from receiving fair compensation for their labor. So I want to end my talk with the question, what does a truly inclusive and diverse society look like? We often think about diversity in terms of race, gender, and ability. And when it comes to employment, we might imagine integrated workplaces that welcome people with different kinds of ability and different levels of ability. But integration in mainstream employment isn't always the best or only option. Perhaps we should also rethink what diversity in employment really means. We could we could preserve traditional industries and workplaces. We could also broaden the range of jobs available, jobs that reflect the strengths and talents of a diversely abled population. Inclusion doesn't have to look the same everywhere. Sometimes diversity means making room for different ways of living and working. While this story about automation and the phasing out of traditional trades and blind workers may seem only relevant to a small group of marginalized people in Hong Kong, with the development of robots and AI, many of us will also be replaced by technology too. So, in an interview a few months ago by Bill Gates, with Bill Gates, Bill Gates said that we will be replaced in 10 years. So, what can we do to make our society sustainable, diverse, and inclusive for us? So, for my last slide, I want to show you this photo of Winston Churchill taken in 1949. So why am I showing you this photo? This seems like irrelevant. This photo is showing that Churchill is reviewing the proofs of the Second World War, a book that he was writing in 1947. So it turns out that Churchill hates stapler. So he preferred his proofs to be hole punched and held together. Yes. So, if you take a look at the picture, I have put a red circle, and you may not see very clearly what they are. And these are treasury tags that I mentioned in the factory. So he prefers to use treasury tags to hold his papers together. And in the red circle, you can vaguely see a treasury tag. So most Americans may not know what these are. These days, you can find these texts in the National Archives in the UK, and many former British colonies still use them for government documents. But with the electronic documents, we this is kind of fading out as well. So today the Treasury Tech or we can call them filing tech department is the one of the remaining departments in the blind factory. So this photo shows the production and circulation of material objects in the British colonial network. The Treasury Tech also reminds us that an insignificant small object that is no longer popular may be the livelihood of someone else today. So as I said, you can so the bottom left are the treasury tech, and in Hong Kong they are nicknamed the blind man string. So this is the main product that they are producing, and you can still find them in a lot of the archives and also in remaining like in the government in former colonies of the UK. So I'll end my talk here, and thank you for listening. And I welcome your questions and responses.
That was great. That gave us a lot to think about, and a lot of different ways into these questions. I want to first of all make sure that everybody joining on Zoom and also here in the classroom, we got about a dozen, about 10 in the classroom here, know that we have some time. I don't want to keep Angelina too much past the bottom of the hour, but if it's okay, Angelina, we might go until about 35 or something like that.
Yes,
Uh,
yes.
And please join with questions. I have actually some interesting ones that connect maybe to Fang Yuhu's talk last week in terms of regimes, including colonial regimes, and these transitions between regimes and how the regime is being portrayed or perceived as respecting individual rights or putting forward social welfare, and these kind of things. Is this becoming a part of the work that you're doing in terms of the British the British governance and then the 97 transition, and in the last decade or so, of course, or really the last 5 or 6 years, the transition to a much more active and directly involved Beijing role in Hong Kong. Do you see this sort of, is there a relevance in terms of these conversations about disability rights and disability justice in terms of what regime is in power?
Yes, I think there are a lot of connections between like the politics in Hong Kong as well as the disability rights. And one thing I could say about the current development is that because as some of you may know about the 2019 anti-extradition protest, which turned into a democratic protests, and then a lot of the legislators, the former legislators who were popularly elected, they were sent to jail, right? So right now the legislature is dominated by like kind of pro-Chinese government legislators. So because of this change and a lot of the disabled people advocates groups and a lot of their activist groups, they did not have sufficient support from legislators because the former legislators who were helping them, they were either in exile or in jail. So now it is much harder to fight for disability rights like before. So this is just one aspect of how this is connected to regime change. And another aspect, as I briefly mentioned in my talk, is about how this is tied to the tension between British colonial government and the mainland Chinese government. So when they had the first strike in the 1960s, that's when China was going through the Chinese Cultural Revolution. So in Hong Kong, because it's under the British government, it had like communism had a bad reputation. So the workers who were trying to get workers' rights, but it was associated with communism. So it did not receive a lot of public support at the beginning. And then by 1971, when they had the second strike, it was successful because the discourse has shifted. And there were more people sympathetic to social welfare at that time.
Thank you, Angelina. Well, question here in the classroom, Javier. And if folks on Zoom have questions, you can type them into the chat or you can raise your hand. Javier, go ahead.
So for the workers that were forced to retire at 55, would the benefits follow them into the retirement, or would they lose their benefits as they retired? And then to a second question, what extent did their work represent economic empowerment versus exploitation?
Um, um, I not hear your question like very clearly. Like, is your question about like after they retired, what kind of benefits they received and how it's connected, like whether they were exploited or not?
Yeah, so were they represented economic empowerment or versus like exploited? Like were they exploited in
Was
the
it,
same way?
were they seen as being empowered economically, or was this a exploitation?
For the retired folks, right?
Before either one, retired or not retired.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for your question. One point that I wanted to raise is this system that they are forced to retire at 55. I believe they may have raised the age to 60 in recent years after they fought hard for it. But then after they retire, they are allowed to remain in the factory, but then they had to become trainees, and that means they don't have like regular wages, and then they only receive a stipends for transportation. So some may argue that it still gives them the work to do, so that they're not bored at home. So that is seen as like a welfare, right? Like from the standpoint of the government, or at least their rhetoric, that is seen as like welfare, or giving them some kind of like meaning of life through just like doing what they've been doing. But then you can argue that this is a form of exploitation because like they no longer receive wages. So there's no minimum wage for these workers who are the most experienced, just because they pass that age, and then they only receive a stipend. So I would argue that that is a form of exploitation, because they perform the same kind of labor and then they don't receive wage anymore. So I think you are right on in pointing out this tension between like empowerment and exploitation. Like it can be, there can be a thin line between these two. So that's exactly what I want to talk about in this presentation, and also in my larger project. And sometimes whether it's empowerment or exploitation is entangled with these policies about employment and about like labor, as well as about social welfare and charity. So these questions are very complicated, and then we kind of have to analyze it on our own, and not just like take it on face value, by as given by the governments of what they are.
Understood. Thank you.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Chuck, here.
Gender disparity in wages for the blind, is there any evidence of that?
Yeah, thank you for your question. I think for the factory, the people who are in the sewing departments, they're mostly women. Um, and on the surface, I would say no, there's no clear difference, because they all kind of receive minimum wage. However, like because a lot of the men are in the filing tax department, and then they also receive like bonuses if they can produce more of the filing tax, and this may not be the case for sewing and the cardboard boxes department. There there may be some slight disparity there. And I think in terms of the factory, I would say on the surface, like we don't see very clear division. But in society, I think you see a bit of this disparity, because just like the society at large, like when women get married and then when they have children, then they are more likely to be the ones who stay home and to raise kids, and their labor are seen as like kind of like private labor, or labor that doesn't like deserve a wage sometimes. So I would say it's more like the disparity is more subtle, but it's there.
Thanks for the question, Chuck, and thank you. Angelina, Dr. Chin, this has been really, really terrific. I want to move toward wrapping up. I don't see any other hands in the room here or on Zoom. So we kept you a little bit long, but we got started, and we got a really, really wonderful lecture. I'm so grateful for you taking the time to share this fascinating topic in so many ways. It gives us so much to think about from these political, social, economic dimensions. I really am very, very grateful that you joined us today, Dr. Chin. Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking Dr. Chin for joining us. I'm excited to follow this work and to see it turn into a paper, a book, whatever is coming next. Is this headed toward a book manuscript?
Yeah, I don't know how long it will take, but then that's my goal. And then I'm hoping to first publish in English, and then translate into Chinese, so that the workers can read them yeah, in the future. So that's my intention. But thank you for having me, because it's not just me. And then I know the people I have interviewed, they really appreciate being heard and being known about. And every time I give a talk, and when I tell them about it, they would be very eager to know what kind of response I get, and they're very excited that other people know about their case. So feel free to write me if you have any more questions, or if you want to talk more about this case, and then how it is similar to other cases in different regions. And thank you for staying and bearing with me.
Thank you, Angelina. And Dr. Chin's link is in the chat for folks on Zoom. We are going to shut down the Zoom in just a second here. But let's see. I'll stop.